This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. The following Care Lab podcast does not provide health or medical advice. All content is provided for information purposes only. Listeners are encouraged to speak with their healthcare provider for specific healthcare advice and are wholly responsible for the outcome of implementing any tips or information presented. This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. The following Care Lab podcast does not provide health or medical advice. All content is provided for information purposes only. Listeners are encouraged to speak with their healthcare provider for specific healthcare advice and are wholly responsible for the outcome of implementing any tips or information presented.
Welcome.
I'm so excited that we are here today. Care Lab is one of my very favorite days. And then if you're watching us on YouTube, then you will see that our guest is already here. We're super excited to have Michele Magner on today. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, ladies.
Yeah. So we like to start our podcast with something ridiculous because we're usually talking about something not very ridiculous and serious. So I got a question for you both.
Okay.
Now I'm going to preface it with people live longer when they have purpose, right? Mm-hmm. And so right now, a lot of our purposes are kids and family and work. And so what I want to know is, what is your retirement job? This job does not have to make money, but what is the thing that you're going to do when you no longer have to hustle it for all of your money? Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Michele, let's start with you. Go ahead.
Okay, something is dropping in. I don't know if this is going to be really a thing, but I am really fascinated with green waste, like being able to recycle organic materials. I chop so much food up in my kitchen and throw it all in the trash. And there are organizations that will collect that. There are cities that are really ahead of the game, and the city actually takes care of it. But I love the idea of running a garden or something where people can bring their food waste, and then I'm helping compost, recycle it. I'm also interested in co-housing. And I think in retirement, if I actually do retire, which I cannot imagine doing, I could picture partnering with this dude in California who is working on co-housing communities.
What is co-housing?
Yeah. It is. Honestly, the first thing that comes to mind are communes.
That's what I'm thinking.
Cults, right?
That's what I'm thinking. Immediately that's a nice word for a cult.
But it's essentially, you have your own living space. It's like 1,000 square foot house, but then there are these community spaces with community kitchens and rec areas and walking trails, and they're compact. So it's 5 acres of land. You can have a co-housing space. And it's literally community. So people leaning on each other, helping each other. And he has built these all over the world. See, we're getting really off track very quickly here, but I'm just fascinated.
That's how we roll on Care Lab. Let's do it.
That's how we roll. Let's go. Keep going down that path because I have questions. Yep. Good.
Yeah, me too. I like it.
I'm a big proponent of staying home as long as possible. And I'm a big proponent of figuring out what is that next living arrangement that's going to work best for you and for your family. I am a huge fan of senior living, and I'm just really curious about this as another option for people to weave through community in their aging senior years? And how can I be part of that?
There's lots of really cool examples of this too. Like my brother used to have a tiny house and they lived in a tiny house community. And because your house is only so big, then there's lots of shared spaces in the place that you park the tiny house. And so you're creating community that way. Intergenerational living is another good example of that.
Yeah.
And if you have, you can do both of your retirement jobs at one time, because if you live in a co-housing place, you can certainly have a compost bin and a compost pile there for everybody.
Check all the boxes.
Dang,
Boom.
you nailed it.
Boom.
Amelia, what about you?
You nailed it. My answer is so boring. Honestly, like I kind of never picture myself not like doing work as an occupational therapist. I just really love what I do. And one of the things that I've always wanted to do, and I hope to do this before I retire, but I would love to go on like a WFIT mission. WFIT is like what World Federation of Occupational Therapists, where you can go to another country where people don't necessarily have access to occupational therapists, and like just spend a good amount of time there and like basically work and serve in that community and help provide services and like problem solve and make cool stuff. And so I think that would be a really cool thing to do. But I know my answer is so boring. Like, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Till I'm 85.
Yeah.
105.
105. I mean, because I'm saying 85 because I feel like by the time you get to 85, you're going to be like, yes, I'm an awesome OT, but I'm going to sit down for a little bit. I just feel like you're not saying that now, but you're going to say that then. I'm just saying.
That's true. Well, here's the other thing. Here's the other thing. Like, there are so many different ways that I can be an OT. Like, I can just shift gears at one point too. Like, I've never done pediatrics. Maybe I decide to do that. I mean, it's not impossible. So yeah, no, but I recognize that's a super boring answer. I'm not like thinking about communes or, you know, anything like that, which I think is super cool. Like I would, if I could, I want to circle back to that a little bit. What a great idea to actually help people, especially if you have lots of different age groups living in the same place.
Yes.
And like really, because everyone can play a role and support each other there. And like, I mean, you just hit such a hot button thing for so many people, which is that I think we don't feel like we have community. It's really hard to feel like you have community. And so it's something everyone is searching for. So I mean, when you open your first one, just let me know.
Okay.
I'm there for it.
I love it. He said in his community, he has 3 retired nurses. So whenever someone isn't doing well or feeling well, they have nurses in their community who are able to help them.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. That's perfect.
What about you, Brandy?
So I'm a woman of many interests, and my retirement job, I got 2 retirement jobs. First retirement job and a second one. The first one is I'm going to be a professor. I love teaching. So I'd love to teach, I don't know about full-time, but more than what I do now, which is like a random class here and there. And then secondly, I want to be a docent at a museum. So
that would be a fun retirement job.
Exactly. I could just like learn about a whole bunch of stuff and then tell everybody about it, and nobody gets tired of it because they only come to the museum once or twice. So they'll keep nobody gets tired of my spiel. I like it. I don't have to create new content.
I love it.
So yeah, those are my retirement jobs.
I feel like I need to think more about this. Clearly, I need to think more about this. I'll come up with something.
I think it should be part of our advanced care planning, actually.
I agree.
That is
because we need to stay active.
Idea.
So we need to have a plan for how we're going to do that.
Yeah, because it's when people don't have meaningful, productive, you could call it work, you could call it whatever you want, but when people don't have a way to spend their time that feels meaningful and productive, that's when we really start to see significant levels of decline. If you look at all the folks who are like living well, aging well into their 90s, into their hundreds, it's folks who have things to do that they like to do that keep them engaged, you know? So
whatever that is, there's no like one thing that is. or
Mm-mm.
any like, you got to do this or this and then you'll be great. No, it's just like having a reason to get up in the morning
Yep.
and
Yep.
move your body.
Absolutely. And
Mm-hmm.
often in service to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
At every age, people can be in service to someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for indulging me. And I know it seems backwards, but now we got to meet you a little bit about what you want to do in your commune composting life. So let's talk about what your actual bio is now. And the reason we wanted to have you on, because you're so passionate about connecting with people as they navigate the adventures of aging and caregiving. And I just love that you always position aging and caregiving as like a positive thing, like an adventure, as opposed to like I don't know, a journey could be one, but journey feels like work. Adventures feels like, this is new. I got to think about this and how am I going to do it? So I love that. And it's from your experience as a family caregiver and your years in senior living. And all of that helps you understand that the challenges that we all face for those who love. And so in doing that, you earned your MBA and your master's in certification in gerontology and working on your gerontology PhD. So we get to add a few more letters to your name very soon, I'm hoping. And you're a certified life coach and dementia practitioner. And I think the thing that is most interesting for our listeners too is that you continue to share fresh content and ideas through your Inspired Caring podcast. We're just a little baby new podcast, and your podcast has been around for such a long time, providing such good service for everyone who listens in. And so we're excited to have you on. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like we've all known each other for a really long time.
Even though it's been fairly short.
Yes. Yeah. Plus, sometimes you just connect with people like that. And isn't that the best? I just
It is
love
the
that.
I
And
do
the
too.
world is very small. So like, you're about to be an adjunct professor at Creighton. Creighton is my alma mater. And
Well,
so you're about to be a Blue Jay. Go Jays. So yeah.
I'm really excited about that class. I am teaching the long-term care administration class, and it's really my hope and desire through this position is to get young people excited about wanting to be in our field and our industry. It's a really diverse ecosystem on how we can take care of each other and take care of seniors, which we have to remember, seniors aren't them. It's like not a separate, different group of people. It's literally you and me in the future, like we were
yeah.
just talking about. I love
Not
how you
that
open.
far in the future. Like, it's going to be here before we know it, probably. So,
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm very excited about that and to see what solutions we can come up with to some of the big issues that we're facing.
Yeah. Is that a new class, or what kind of students are you teaching that to?
It is part of the Arts and Sciences program at Creighton in the Healthcare Administration program.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah, I was thinking that too when I read that was the title of the class. I was like, that sounds interesting and something I should have taken. So, yeah.
I'm pulling through a lot of speakers in the industry as well, from high level groups that are working on legislation to administrators that are running continuing care communities, death doula, like just really want to broaden their horizon about what is already happening so we can see what new ways they can come up with.
So I was just about to ask you a question about why senior living is not scary, and then you dropped the term death doula, which I am newly familiar with, but I feel like you should define for people so they know what that is.
yeah.
Okay, so I am not a certified death doula. I have peers that do have that designation and certification. And I had my first child in Kansas City, actually, and I hired a birth doula. And what a birth doula did for me was really just be by my side. Leading up to, we talked a lot about what we wanted that birth to look like. And she stayed by my side during that process and then followed up with me afterwards. And it's really similar with a death doula. Other countries are not only familiar with this term, but they have a booming industry. And it's someone who really helps you explore, what does a good death look like for you? What what would you want? Who do you absolutely want not to be in the room with you? What smells and interests and music and things that would be supportive and loving to you as you are ending your life. And so I just think it is a blossoming industry in the US. I'm not in that field specifically, but I'm just really interested in how they can be part of this ecosystem for us as families.
Hey there, it's Amelia. Listen, I am so thrilled to have a great resource like Ask Sammy as part of the Care Lab team, and here's why. It's a game changer for aging in place because it makes it so simple. All you do is ask. Just type in your question or even tell Sammy what the problem is and get tailored solutions. Everything from innovative adaptive equipment to comprehensive resources. It's a great way to become more empowered, to live more independently, and to live with greater confidence. And my favorite thing about how Ask Sammy works is it's deeply rooted in dignity and practicality. So whether you're a fellow therapist, a care partner, or someone who's seeking solutions for themselves, visit www.asksammy.com. We're going to link it in the show notes so you can find it there. Start making home more accessible today. Now, back to the show.
That is like such a good point. And the first time that I learned about it, which is probably not more than like a year or so ago, is I was like, oh, that makes so much sense, right? Like the reason we use doulas as we give birth is very similar to the reasons why we should have somebody helping us at the end of our lives. And, you know, to me, it feels like a thing that you should think about when you're not feeling bad at all. Nothing's wrong. Because then you can like be maybe not reflective because this hasn't happened yet, but whatever, forward thinking, I guess, about what kind of experience you would want to create in a similar way to like, as soon as you get pregnant, you might make a birth plan. Even though you're not pregnant enough to even know what's going on, but you know what you feel like you want to happen, and then you try to stick to it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So not to derail the death doula conversation, because I do think like it's a very cool idea, and I've seen it just explode actually. Where I am in DFW, like it seems like it's all over the place, and nationally I think it is, which I think is a wonderful recognition of the fact that we should make the end of someone's life really good if we can. It's an important moment. It's like, you know, other than being born, it's probably the second most important moment of your life. So we should probably make it really good. So I don't want to like totally derail that, but I do want to ask you, Michele, because like you have you have this really incredible journey, I think, that you have been on. Like you have so much knowledge and so much expertise, and like you have like degrees and you teach and you do all this stuff. Like, how did you get to where you are now and being the advocate that you are now?
I had the privilege of being the primary caregiver for both of my grandmothers. And people who are primary caregivers know what that means. We use that language, but really I was the granddaughter who lived in town with both of my grandmas, and I was happy to help as they were aging and things were clearly shifting in their lives. And ultimately it meant that I had that power of attorney for both of these ladies and help them through the last 5 to 7 years of their lives. And then it rolled into actually us moving our family up to Omaha because my mother-in-law did end up with a dementia diagnosis. And then my father-in-law ended up with terminal cancer. So I have walked as a caregiver, an unintentional caregiver to 4 different family members. And then I've worked in senior living for 7 years, which provided me the opportunity to work with just hundreds of families over that time as they were on that caregiving journey as well. And it's been really just a really rich experience for me emotionally, because it's such a vulnerable time. And to your point about end of life, there's, I believe, 5 phases of caregiving. Phase 1 is when you're just generally kind of annoyed with your parents or your people because you're like, they just are not keeping up like they used to. I refer to that as
Stage 1, general annoyance.
general annoyance, frustration and annoyance. And the reason I do count that as a phase of caregiving is because you are observing a shift. Like there is a shift in how things have been, and that is the beginning of where you are headed through end of life, which is stage 5. Stage 2 and 3, those phases, people are intervening a little more, helping a little more, trying to pull through some additional resources and support. And then phase 4, people are typically drowning. That's when they really begin to struggle because they're overwhelmed, their bandwidth is shot. It's just such a they're doing everything for the person they're trying to help. So that's the background has been family caregiving, senior living, and then really being an observer of just this process that we go through, and then creating work to try and support people along the way at every phase.
But what's phase 5? Did you not say phase 5?
Oh, yeah.
Stage 5 is that end of life.
Okay.
So hopefully by stage 1 or phase 1 is when you're generally just annoyed. Phase 2 is when there's usually a medical incident. Usually OTs are involved at this point. There's a medical incident or illness or maybe a surgery, but it's short term. Everybody's happy to help. We're jumping in. We're problem solving. That next phase 3, is when there is a significant situation that has occurred that is going to require some new decisions to be made for someone. And that is a really challenging phase. That's when we're really struggling as family members to get on the same page. That is when we don't agree on timelines often. And then stage 4 is where that burden, that caregiver burden and strain is really being shouldered primarily by one person, because we've talked about how things have changed over time. We're spread out now. So oftentimes it's really just one family member that is burdening that caregiver role. And then that end phase 5, is that last 6 months to a year of someone's life, where hopefully we can move into acceptance, reconnection, and just really creating a beautiful end of life for somebody.
I love how you lay those stages out. Honestly, like it's so easy to relate to. And I think that most people don't think about, caregiving as something that breaks that is like broken down like that. It's just like, I'm a caregiver this whole time. Right. But putting it into those stages, I think is really, really helpful for people to kind of figure out where they are, but also know where they might be headed to, so they can start to maybe like, okay, right now I'm a stage 1 caregiver. Knowing that I'm a stage 1 caregiver, that helps me to maybe make some plans now for when maybe I'm a stage 3 or stage 4 caregiver. Okay, now I'm clearly a stage 4 caregiver. How can I best manage this situation to make my transition into stage 5 caregiving easier? I've never really heard it laid out that way, but like something with the way you said it, honestly, just really landed for me.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think the other piece is that there's fluidity between the stages and phases, Amelia. And I think people, like you said, it's not just you're in this role or out of this role. There's these spots of transition that cause the most stress for families. And I think about being a family caregiver. If somebody just has all those decisions made of what they want, how they want things to be, where things are going, like if a person has that foresight and bandwidth to make those decisions for themselves as family members, then we're kind of just marching next to them and executing their wishes. That's just often not the case of what's happening. And so that's where the phases just get really complicated.
And I'd also argue that people who are in the phase 1 don't identify themselves as a caregiver. And if you actually did, we probably have more caregivers as the stages go on, right? Because you already identified yourself as part of this process, and maybe you'll stay engaged, and we won't be burdening just the one person who's closest. The close person is definitely needed and necessary. You need to be physically present a lot of the time, but there's also so many things people can do that are not there. But you need to have this recognition that you are part of that, and the phases help kind of lay that out, which I think is really awesome.
So I think that like you having all of the experience that you have and the knowledge and the training and the education that you have, it must really inform the work that you do in senior care and senior housing. Like how do you have an example of how you've been able to, use this breadth of experience and knowledge that you have to really make positive impacts in like the senior housing world that you're a part of?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that I realized when I worked in senior living is that a lot of times when I would hear families in conversation with their loved one, you hear don't you remember, mom, I told you I was going to be here. So, we hear a lot of remember, I told you. There's a lot of really just making people feel bad for being in their physical state or condition that they are in.
Mom, you got to
And
exercise. How come you're not doing the work? How PT came? How come you didn't do it? That kind of thing.
right, why
Yeah.
didn't you participate today? Or,
Yeah.
you have to do this or you're just not going to get better. So
Yeah.
that's what has led me to pursue studying aging further. Why are we aging so differently? What are those factors that contribute to that? But really, it was understanding that it is fear and sadness that are those undercurrents that family members are experiencing. And so it has completely informed all of the work that I'm doing. And I put together a program, a membership program for senior living communities to subscribe to. It's an annual membership, and that allows them to provide these support services to their family members who have a loved one in their building. So the fear, the sadness is often like an alphabet soup of guilt and shame and resentment and anger. And there's also some joy. You mentioned earlier that there is a positive spin and aspect to this. And I think once we can move down this ladder of acceptance, like the faster we can move down that, the faster we can get to being in the present moment with our family member and experiencing those moments of joy together. Because
Okay.
people continue to have value and add value to our lives at every age.
I think so much of the struggle that I have seen in people through like my work in practice is struggling to hold on to things that aren't there anymore. It's struggling to hold on to the past or the way that it used to be, or being so worried about the future and what's going to happen that they can't be there in the moment with the person that they love. And I realize, by the way, like from an outsider looking in, it's very easy for me to say all that. It's a different story to actually like be in the moment and actually let things go and just be there. I'm not saying that that's an easy thing to do, but when we can do that, there are such powerful and profound moments of connectedness that we can have with folks, even if maybe they don't necessarily remember exactly who we are, or even if they're not physically capable of sitting up and wrapping their arms around us or whatever it is. Like those moments can just be really, really profound when we can find that connection by just being there and accepted. So again, like I think your stages and the way you think about that is just so helpful.
Thank you. I recently was at a retreat and they talked about, worrying about the past or worrying about the future or reflecting on the past. And they said it's like you're in this time warp when that is happening. Since you're unable to be in this present moment, we have that control and that power to actually control our thoughts. Our thoughts aren't something that are just happening to us. We are the ones generating them. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think we lose track of that,
Mm-hmm.
that those thoughts that are dropping in, those are not just from someone or somewhere else. They came from our brain. So we get to decide in that moment and make the choice. I call it wake up, pay attention, and choose, so that we can have a better outcome in this moment. You know, we, to your exact point, we look at someone that we love and we expect them, our expectations are mismanaged. We expect them to
Mm-hmm.
operate the way they did 5 years ago, 6 months ago, 10 years ago. They're a different person. And the faster that we can move into connecting with where they are at, meeting them where they are at right now, the faster that we are actually going to feel better. If we keep banging our heads up against a wall, expecting them to respond a certain way or be a certain way, it's just going to wear us both out. You know, it's interesting. My dad and stepmom are out in California, and my sister is out there, and I go and visit a couple times a year. And it was like 3 years ago when they were talking, about and bringing up me as a teenager, which is a fun topic because it makes them look really good. I was not the easiest teenager. And I thought, oh, we're in a dance here. Like, they're going to talk about what a pain in the tush I was as a kid. I'm going to defend myself. Like, that's going to be our little dance. And I made the decision, I actually would like to show up differently to this conversation. And I was able to redirect the conversation into some great lessons learned and some experiences that I've had as a result from my childhood. And it was just really interesting to see them shift energy and to see them shift gears. But I realized I can't go out there and expect them to be or do different. Like, I just can respond in a different way that will
Mm-hmm.
better serve us in our relationships right now.
Care Lab listener, I have a question for you. If someone you love was going to hire a caregiver, what qualities would you want that caregiver to have? You probably want them to be reliable, trustworthy, kind maybe, just a generally dependable good person, right? Second question, would you also want them to be trained? I'm going to guess the answer is an emphatic yes. Okay, third and final question for you. Do you think it matters who provides that training? Like, is it cool if it's just anybody? Or would you want that person providing the training to be a qualified expert? Assuming you do, in fact, love this person that needs a caregiver, you probably want the expert, right? Well, that's what Higher Standards Caregiver Training does. Higher Standards Caregiver Training provides 100% occupational therapist-led training for caregivers. Caregivers get taught everything from gold standard foundational skills for transfers and activities of daily living, all the way up to how to deal with specific diseases, injuries, and illnesses. And most importantly, they are taught these things in a practical way that enhances the participation of the person being cared for. And it protects the safety of everybody involved. Why? Because everybody deserves a higher standard. Find a course for individuals or learn about training for care organizations at higherstandardscaregivertraining.com. I love the way you put that, because in the occupational therapy world, that is called therapeutic use of self. And so it's like one of my most favorite concepts and the thing that I talk to students about the most, because I think it's the thing that's the most powerful. And while we named it and claimed it and we identify it and use it, it's not necessarily something that you have to get a doctorate in order to use it. And you just explained how people can do that in their literal everyday life. We do this with kids all the time, actually. And we match and mirror them in order to help them come along and do the thing that we want them to actually do, even though they're in their emotions or whatever's going on with them. And to take that perspective with your family members or loved ones in order to curate a moment or just a conversation or the way that y'all engage with each other is such a powerful way to go about things. If you just like what you just said, I can't remember what word you said, identify it, name it, and claim it, and do it. That, yes.
Do you kind of bring that to how you help advocate and teach people about things like how they can have some of these more difficult conversations about, for example, senior living, or having conversations about decisions for support services. Like, do you does that come together for you in terms of how you can help guide those conversations?
Absolutely. The core work within my program that I offer is really around expectation management,
Mm.
boundaries, emotional management. It's a very emotional time. This is a very, very highly charged time. And so we want to reduce those big swings in emotions so that we can use that prefrontal cortex to think more clearly and make those decisions. So, it is elements of self development. To develop our own self will allow us to come to the situation a little bit differently with a fresher perspective on things. I think also people don't know what's normal. And I'm using air quotes
Mm-hmm.
because we're on this road with aging family members, and it can be very isolating. And there are some common denominators, but it's all very unique to our family situations. So the work that I've put together and continuing to work on and study and research is around how do we have those hard conversations? How do we shift our perspective in a way that is going to better serve all of us? Here's the bottom line. Like, humans are built to be in community, just like you were talking about, Brandy, right? Like, we are designed to be in this together. And so, as much as we can soften the edges around our point of view, soften the edges around what we think somebody else should be doing, will give us those spaces to actually weave through the interventions that are going to help all of us in the long run.
That's super powerful. And the one question I have for you, especially because of your experience in senior living, and also earlier saying that you think people should live at home as long as they can, is it feels like in healthcare or in the aging industry, people choose a side. And it sounds like you're saying both are good ideas. And so, can you explain more about how you think about senior living and how you define it?
I think there is room for everybody in this care ecosystem as someone is on that aging journey. I believe truly in my heart that people, of course, want to and should stay home for as long as possible. And then at some point, we hit these three different things that are really important to take into consideration as we're making decisions for how we're going to proceed next. It is health and safety and well-being. Health, safety, and well-being for the person that we're caring for. Health, safety, and well-being for ourselves as family caregivers. You know, in my heart and soul, I genuinely believe, had my mother-in-law made that move to memory care a little bit sooner, there is potential we could have caught my father-in-law's cancer sooner. He could have received the treatment he needed, and maybe perhaps he would still be alive. Now, I get to make that story up in my head because my heart is hurting that they're both 75 years old and they're both gone. In senior living in our world, we very often say people wait too long. They waited too long. And part of it is that we really struggle as humans to self-assess. And as caregivers, we also struggle to release or relinquish or shift gears because we are so used to being everything for someone. And so we'll have people coming to the build, and I don't work in a building at this point. I'm not affiliated with any specific building or company, but just in general, people will tour a building thinking, well, we're ready for independent living. And we're like, no, they need a nursing home. Like, we have skipped independent living. We have skipped assisted living. The level of care required at this point is intense. It's a lot. And kudos to the family who have been putting it together and keeping it together for that long. But really, it's planting seeds here and there. What do you think what do you want? What would you like your life to look like 3 years from now? Like, what feels realistic? What feels good to you? How can we as family members support you in what you desire? Or just some gentle ways to start talking about it and have the conversation. I always say dropping dead is not a plan.
It's a thing that
That's
might
funny
happen,
because
but
I've
it's
had
not a
people tell
plan.
me that's their plan.
Of course, like we all want to wake up dead. But realistically, we know that we are living longer. The last 12 years of our lives, there is chronic illness that we are managing. Like the numbers are just astronomical with dementia. There's over 80, maybe 100 different conditions, diseases that can cause the symptom of dementia. So it's just important to think, it is important to think ahead, and not everybody is a planner. Did I answer the question about the senior living? And I have done some little reels on Instagram inside buildings just to start, kick open the door, the front door. What's it look like in there? What's happening in there? So that we can not feel so afraid of the idea.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to, I think one of the reasons that people are often afraid to go into senior living, and I say this as someone who, as part of my profession, I help people to age in place as long as they want to be there. I think that one of the things that can be challenging about staying in someone's home and in the community that they've been in for 30 or 40 or 50 years until all the way to the end of their life. And I'm not saying it's not the right thing for some people. For some people it is. But the community tends to start to change around that person. And all of a sudden the support system that was there, that was built into their community, has moved away, or maybe it's passed away, and then they become more isolated. And I think one of the real beauties of going into senior living is that you can build a community within senior living to still have ongoing socialization, to have an ongoing support system that's outside of your own caregiver or your own family, right? And so I think that when we're having conversations about what people want their lives to look like, if being in a place where they have friends, where they feel supported, where they can socialize and, have a meal with friends or family or whatever, and make that easy, then we have to talk about how those things are going to happen. And if and when that's gonna need to transition from maybe the house where they've lived for 30 years, maybe it's easier at a certain point to go into, like a continuing care retirement community or something like that, where they can still have those needs met, maybe just in a different location. So sometimes it has to, the point I'm getting to in my long-winded way as usual, is that it's more about what people want their quality of life to look like, and what does that actually mean? What things are you doing to have a high quality of life, and where can you do those things really and truly and realistically?
Yeah, exactly. And that does go back to that well-being piece of that formula. And, what people will say is, well, I don't like people that much, or I don't want to be around people that much. And what they're actually doing is sitting at home on the couch watching TV. And social isolation is incredibly detrimental to our aging journey, our own aging health, and our health and well-being. And what I have witnessed in my experience, what I have witnessed with literally thousands of people who have said, well, that is not for me, because I don't like people that much. I don't want to be around all those old people. I don't want to do that. Is we'll have people who have waited too long move into the building, which means that they're in a pretty declined state. So what we often see in senior living is that when we say someone has waited too long, it means that their condition has really deteriorated or declined, or the caregiver themselves condition has deteriorated, or they are declining. And so, this concept of, well, I just want to stay home or I just want to drop dead. Really, what we see once people move into a senior living community is this incredible rebound. Like everybody can catch their breath. Everybody is in this position of falling back into their old previous roles as either spouse or child or granddaughter. And with that, there's this really beautiful blossoming. And I think that's where that acceptance can come in of where we are, because that burden and strain and the stress and the anxiety has been much alleviated. Now, every solution brings its own new set of problems. It's not utopia. We're not moving to Narnia here, but just to say that every family I have experienced and worked with has had that opportunity to watch their loved one really thrive again in a beautiful way that they just weren't seeing at home.
Well, Michele, thank you so much for being on Care Lab. Listeners, if you haven't already, take a second and just click that little button that says subscribe wherever you are listening, or if you are watching this on the Care Lab YouTube channel, make sure you just click that little button so you can make sure and get notified when our episodes come out every Friday. Michele, thank you again so much for being here. You are just like this wonderful fount of wisdom and knowledge. And where can people find you?
People can find me. I'm on Facebook, Michele Magner. There's only one L in Michele, Michele, Magner, Magner. I'm on Instagram at Inspired Caring. That's my podcast as well. And then my website is michelemagner.com. michelemagner.com.
All right. So another podcast for everyone to check out too. Definitely check out Michele's podcast. And thank you again for listening to Care Lab.
Bye.
Bye.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network. This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.